And joining us now, retired U.S. Army General Steph Twitty. He served multiple combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and prior to his retirement in 2020 was Deputy Commander of the United States European Command. He's now an MSNBC military analyst. Also with us, history professor at Tulane University, Walter Isaacson is with us. It's really good to have you both with us. General Twitty, what do you make of the potential for some sort of humanitarian escape for the people inside the steel plant? Is there any reason to have hope?
Well, I don't think so. We do know that the Russians time and time again has said that they're going to do something, but they do something differently. And this is another ploy to continue to bring terror on the Ukrainian people. Here's what I will tell you that we need to take a look at here. Mariupol, with the Russians being there, they are continuing to bring terror on the Ukrainian people, but it amazes me that they haven't put forces in the steel plant to try and root out the remaining Ukrainian forces that are in there. That should tell us a lot, that they are not willing to take on the hard fight. And the hard fight is getting in those tunnels, rooting those Ukrainian forces out there to claim victory. And so if they're not willing to do that, then when you take a look at the entire war for 9 weeks now, we have not seen a strategic victory. And this Mariupol may not be a victory for the Russians as this continues.
Let me ask you your response to the SecDef and Secretary of State visiting Zelensky, talking about weapons, and instead of just helping them survive, talking about providing the sort of weapons that they need to win, to beat the Russians. Also talking about degrading Russian forces to the degree that they can never launch this sort of attack against the Ukrainian people again. It seems, at least to my ears, to be a heck of a change from a U.S. policy. We're now just out and out getting to the point where we're saying we're in this for a Ukrainian victory, and we're in this to bleed the Russians out so badly they're too weak to ever do this again. What were your thoughts?
The two best words that I've heard from the administration lately: winning and weakening the Russians. Now, in order to win, we have to continue to give the Ukrainians, obviously, what they need to win this fight. And it's not just we, all of Europe, all of NATO, our 30 countries, they have to get behind this fight and resource them with the stuff they need. When it comes to weakening, it cannot be just the military being weakened by military power. It's got to be across all the instruments of power, their economy. And so when you take a look at the oil that the Europeans are buying each day, fueling that with 1 billion a day, we got to figure out how we can wean the Europeans off the oil. When it comes to the diplomatic, we got to continue to isolate Russia. And so winning, to me, is not just crippling the military, because with the money that they are generating, they can always build that military back. It's got to be a long-term across all instruments of power if we're going to weaken them.
Hey, Walter, it's Jonathan. First, just a note, as Raf was saying a moment ago, that the president imminently was going to announce his pick to be ambassador to Ukraine. The president did just that. So, Bridget Bink, that is official now, and that's just good show producing here. But I want to get you on something else here. There's been a lot of talk in recent weeks about May 9th, which is Victory Day. You're, of course, a history professor. You know so well what it meant at the end of World War II for the then Soviet Union. U.S. officials I spoke to for a piece that moved over the weekend say they don't really see that Putin would use that day to escalate violence, but they do wonder if he would try to claim some sort of hollow victory, perhaps even a hollow progress report. Although they note with some amusement it'd be hard to have a major military parade in Moscow when most of your tanks have been blown up in Ukraine. So tell us a little bit, Walter, as to what you think Putin might try to do that day to save some face.
Well, I do think you could always hope that you could have a ceasefire in which Putin could declare a victory that's not really a victory, but allows sort of a ceasefire line in which there is some control in eastern Ukraine by the Soviets, by the former Soviet troops, the Russians. And by doing so, he would be able to say this is disputed territory. And I think the Ukrainians would have to say, as President Zelensky has said he would, that we can negotiate over a period of 15 years, perhaps, Crimea and perhaps even parts of eastern Ukraine, and just draw a ceasefire line, and let's have a ceasefire of this. This is, if you're talking about the scenario you put out, that the Russians want to save some face, it's like have a permanent ceasefire with occupied territory that will be settled over the course of 5 or 10 years.
You know, Walter, let's talk about what happened in France last night and talk about how quickly history changes. Here we had for 4 years Donald Trump trying to destroy NATO, along with, obviously, Vladimir Putin, Marine Le Pen also talking about destroying NATO. You had this unholy alliance that went from Washington to Paris to Warsaw to Hungary, all the way to Russia. Now let's look what's happened over the past 6 weeks. I just wrote it down really quickly. Germany. Coming out saying they're going to build their military in a way they haven't since 1945. Germany, preeminent NATO power, will have a larger military than Russia. You have Sweden and Finland. My God, Finland, a dagger, really, at the top of Russia, talking about getting into NATO. That was unthinkable 6-7 weeks ago. You have the Swiss, who, of course, were neutral during World War II, neutral while Hitler was storming across Europe. The Swiss becoming engaged against Russia as well. And then, of course, last night, France, just an absolute, total rejection of Le Pen and her pro-Putin, anti-NATO stance, 58.5 to 41.5%. You know, people said last night, oh, you know, in America, that would be a landslide. You know what you call that in France? A landslide. It's a landslide and a complete, total rejection. The center has held almost 6 out of 10 voters choosing the center to extremism. This is an extraordinarily strong report card for the same NATO that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin wanted to destroy just a year and a half ago.
An amazing miscalculation by Putin, because he certainly has gotten the exact opposite of what his objectives were, which was undermining NATO. And indeed, you can hope that these are straws in the wind against what has been a 20, 25-year trend of a movement towards more authoritarian, populist, perhaps socialist. You can even use those phrases against people in the United States who are doing certain things that they call conservative, but are actually authoritarian, populist, socialist. And you see it still in Europe. I mean, obviously, you have Viktor Orban in Hungary. So the real question is, can we in the West, who believe in democracy and believe in the rule of law and individual liberty, can we recapture this moment? And that requires, I think, understanding why there has been a backlash against the Western democratic ideals, why there has been a populist backlash, because a lot of people got left out of the prosperity. A lot of people got a lot of resentment for the elites. And we don't want that to continue to be driving politics. We can hope that this is a turning point.